What's up, guys? Gray Jack Gaming, and today we're going to do a dungeon guide for Ragefire Chasm Normal. Normal. Why? Three reasons, really. For one, I love the idea of a brand new person just installing WoW, just getting going, finally able to do a dungeon, and they already want to be great. They already want to perfect their character. The second reason is that I think that if you learn how to understand the mechanics of a fight, even in the early dungeons, that when you finally get up to end game content, it's a little bit more natural and you don't have to think as much about it because you've been doing boss mechanics all the way from Ragefire Chasm Normal. And then the third reason, okay, maybe there's two reasons. Before we get started, just take a peek at the dungeon journal. That way when we actually see the mechanic, we'll already have a base level understanding of what it is we're seeing. All right, as you can see, the first boss we're going to encounter is Adderog. And just so you know, I am going to pronounce all of these perfect. Maybe not. I do like to take a look at the model. That way it kind of just helps it seed the memory to an image in my mind instead of just trying to understand all the different bosses' names and the abilities. If I see what the boss looks like when I actually see it in game, it's going to help me remember what abilities I can look forward to. Now, he has two main abilities. First one is the Inferno Charge. Adderog fixes his eyes on a player, charging their location and inflicting physical damage to all enemies or to all players on impact. The reason why I emphasize the word location is that he doesn't just fixate himself on you and hit you no matter where you go. So when you're battling him and you recognize that you are fixed, you can actually dodge the mechanic altogether. You move laterally to the side and he's going to charge to where you were. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind with a group here is that it doesn't make sense to ever stack on top of each other. Really, it would make sense to make like a half circle around him. That way, if he fixated on one person and that person happened to move to the side, he doesn't still hit somebody else. If you're a melee DPS, you want to make sure a ranged DPS isn't behind you. Because if he fixates on that range DPS, he might have to come through you just to hit that range. The second ability is Flame Breath. Adderog breathes flames, inflicting fire damage to a player. The only thing you really want to make note of here is that this mechanic falls on the tank. As the tank, you should turn him 180 degrees away from the rest of the raid. That way when he hits with AoE, it's not damaging everybody. The Dark Shaman Corinthal, here's his character model, obviously an orc. He has two abilities. Twisted Elements is the first. Dark Shaman Corinthal hurls a bolt of twisted magic at an enemy, inflicting shadow damage. Now the thing about this ability is that it's actually interruptible. So yes, obviously you can interrupt it, which negates the ability altogether. The only thing is he casts it pretty often. So, you know, a lot of interrupts have cooldowns, especially this. If you're running this dungeon at a lower level, you might not have a lot of interrupt abilities. You could stagger the interrupts. So like maybe the first interrupt will be on the tank, and then maybe the melee DPS will get the second interrupt, and you can rotate off and at least maybe interrupt more than one. But I do believe that he casts them so often that it might be a little bit difficult to do that. His second ability is the Shadow Storm. Dark Shaman Corinthal calls down a hail of twisted elements that rain from the sky for 15 seconds, inflicting shadow damage to all players within 21 yards of impact. Now this one, it's going to lay down some AoE type circles on the floor. Simply move out of it. This is like the most notorious mechanic to ever get pissed off at one of your teammates because they're just standing in muck the entire time. All you have to do is move. Kind of sucks for certain casters is that they have to interrupt their spells to get out of it. But outside of that, this one's pretty easy to avoid. Here's Slagma's character model. Slagma has two abilities as well. Slagma spits lava at a player's location, inflicting fire damage to all players within 31 yards. 31 yards is a pretty big area, so you're going to have to spread out quite a bit to not get inflicted by somebody else's. If he spits at another person, you want to make sure that there's enough distance between you guys, that you're not getting hit by somebody else's. But also this is another one. When he spits it at you, move. Get out of the muck. His second ability is Submerge. Slagma submerges and emerges at a new location after spitting lava 5 times. Now this one is going to make a little bit more sense when you actually see the boss because it's almost like a webbed type environment where he can dip under bridges and come up on other sides. So he's going to go up, he's going to do his first lava spit. He's going to do that 5 different times. He's going to drop down to where you can't attack him for a couple seconds. You just kind of got to look around, spot him when he pops back up, and then continue DPSing. Now, one last thing I want to mention that's not listed in the dungeon journal, that web-based bridge-like system that I was telling you about, you can easily run off of it, and you end up in lava. So that would be a bad thing. And I almost hesitated to say it but then I wanted to because it happened to me. And then the very next time it happened to my buddy. And I was like, okay, maybe we're just a couple of goofs. And then I think on the one that I have recorded, it may or may not be the one that I recorded because I recorded the dungeon run a couple times, is that the tank, just a random guy, he did it as well. So with all that being said, I felt like it was noteworthy to mention here. And here is Lava Guard Gordoth's character model. Very hunchback, orc-like guy with some warrior-type armor. Has 3 abilities. The first one is Seismic Slam. Lava Guard Gordoth slams the ground, inflicting physical damage to all players within 251 yards, knocking them back. First of all, that's a really odd number, Blizzard. 250? Wouldn't have worked? The key thing to think about here is that you're not really going to dodge it. So that's just going to kind of be on the healer. Ground Rupture is the second ability. Lava Guard Gordoth ruptures the ground, inflicting physical damage to the player, knocking them back. This is one that's a lot more isolated, and I believe that there's a split second before the damage hits that you see the change in the ground before like the spikes, the rupture comes up to get you. And then the third one is Enrage. Lava Guard Gordoth enrages when he reaches 30% health remaining, increasing his attack speed by 30% and physical damage done by 10% for 5 minutes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the video of my run through. I might mention some things along the way, and we'll highlight some of the abilities as we see them. Holy Paladin, by the way. I'm going to do a little bit of DPS. And you can see I put the beacon on the tank. I'm itching to get going. Nobody else seems to be as anxious, especially the tank. Looks like people still getting quests. Somebody else already pulled DPS, although that's not ideal. I don't mind it. Using Healbot as an overlay, or not an overlay, using Healbot as an add-on, just FYI. As you can see, I'm not dead last as the healer in DPS. You can actually see the boss way up far away. He's the big dog, and the tank right here actually pulls him, even though we're still fighting this other guy, which again, isn't the biggest deal, but kind of a unique idea. So the tank should face him away because right now you're going to see this cast of the AoE right there. Oh, you actually don't even see the cast. It's a channel. So you can't necessarily see it coming. Now, the one thing that he set his eyes on that guy there. So it's a very short charge, but you've seen how I cleared out of the way. Now I'm going to pause it. I'm going to actually rewind it. And I'm going to pause it right before he charges and show you something. You see all of those cast members back there? All the casters back there? If one of them had their eyes fixated on one of them, this melee DPS would also be hit. So that's kind of where I was saying we should kind of be in a half circle. That way it should only be one. And this guy, I believe, dodges. He dodged it a bit. I do wonder. Yeah, it looks like he dodged it altogether. He didn't get hit there. You're going to probably have another channel of that the AoE fire. But since the tank appropriately has him turned away, only the tank gets hit. So it's very easy to heal through. And my guess is that he actually fixates his eyes on me, and I ran, about 180 degrees in the other direction. So he just charged to an empty space. There was no other casters or nobody else involved. So I would say avoiding that ability was pretty well. One last AoE fire breath that the tank appropriately had him faced away. So all in all, outside of that, the melee DPS, having the casters directly behind them, and my guess is that they're not even aware of that mechanic. Most people aren't too aware of the boss mechanics at this low of a dungeon. But all in all, I'd say we did things pretty well there. All right, we're coming up to the Dark Shaman. You can see him doing his little magic tricks in the background there. Tank pulls. Remember, he has the AoE that he's going to lay on the floor. But also, I want you to keep an eye on his cast. He's casting that Twilight Elements. Nobody interrupts because, why interrupt? And he casts it, and then he's already casting a few seconds later. So even if the tank did happen to interrupt that first one, he would have casted it a few seconds later. And now here's the AoE that he's putting out on the floor. You know, his hitbox is big enough that you can move out of the way and keep DPS in. You can see that's exactly what the tank's doing. All in all, a pretty easy mechanic to avoid all damages. You can see everybody's health remain pretty high, and we've already burned through them DPS-wise. Now here's, we're approaching Slagmaw, and as you can see the bridges, you can easily run off a bridge right into the lava. So as we come up to Slagmaw's hitbox is actually enormous, so you don't have to get right up on the edge to feel like you have to melee DPS. Go ahead and back off a little bit and DPS, and you'll be more than all right. You'll be able to see Slagmaw in the back. Here, there he is. Tank's already running up. Everybody's topped off full health. Tank is appropriately staying back, which is good. Now the other DPS, you can see he ran right up on it. Slagmaw, this is where he's going to spit 5 different times and then go down up to a new location. You can see that he's constantly casting that spit. You can see that it's landing by us. I didn't move through that one. He goes down, he came back up another random slot. If you took a look at the map, you can see that he has 4 different locations that he could come back up on. The DPS are getting very close. I try to angle the camera this way so that we could count the number of times that he spit, just so that you can see that after the 5th one, he's going to dip down and go back up. That's why I wasn't even trying to avoid that mechanic. I kind of thought that showing you guys the 5 spits would be a little bit more beneficial. You can see how close that tank is, and actually the melee DPS as well. But overall, you know, pretty easy mechanic to go, and that would actually be an easy time to accidentally run off into the lava, is when the boss falls on top of you and you can't see your character. All right, now for the last boss, Lava Guard Gordoth. He's the one that has a few abilities that you just have to eat, and I think that's probably the intent, to make it feel like more of a strain on the healer, that everybody's taking this damage and it's kind of a panic to get everybody coming up. He's going to do the big smash on the ground, which does the AoE to everybody within 251 yards. You could see how big the entire area of effect was. And then he also does that rupture. You've seen that spike come back up. I'm going to rewind it. And let's take a look at the melee DPS to see if we can spot the ground beforehand. He's going to turn around. He does the rupture. Now, there really isn't time. I'm going to rewind it one more time just to see if he does a cast. If you could keep an eye on a cast bar. Yep. So if you were able to spot that cast, you would know quickly enough to move aside. You could see the damage and be having to heal him after that. And then at 30%, which we're approaching right now, he's going to enrage, where his damage is going to go up. I think he does one more massive smash. We may burn through him too quickly. Nope, there it is. That's the ball game, folks. So I hope you guys appreciated the time and effort I put into Ragefire Chasm normal. I know what the third reason was. And then the third reason, okay, maybe there's 2 reasons. The third reason is that I plan on doing a dungeon guide for all the dungeons. So at what point do I determine, hey, this dungeon is now difficult enough to actually put a guide out there? So I didn't want to have to make that determining factor. So I figured at some point I was going to come through and do it anyways. So that's the third reason as to why I did a dungeon guide for Ragefire Chasm normal. So if you guys ever want to be a part of any of my recordings, I actually live stream on Twitch. You can catch me there, twitch.tv/GrayJackGaming. You can find me on all social medias at GrayJackGaming. I just hit Twitch affiliate, which is like so dope. I'm very, very happy about that. So stop by the channel, say what's up, and like this, subscribe here for future dungeon guides. And with all that, guys, we'll see you next time.